think of his premiership like an aircraft wing with metal fatigue, right? Yeah. Now, if an aircraft wing has got metal fatigue, unless you fix it, at some point it's going to drop off, the plane is going to crash, but you don't know exactly when.
It seems to suggest that the number of people who want lower spending, lower taxes, it's that number is the highest it's been since the early 80s. It feels like, are we seeing a shift rightwards economically, perhaps, before we even talk about where the Labour Party might be going?
Yeah, you're actually referring to the British Social Attitudes series that Luke Trill from More in Common, excellent pollster, tweeted out. But it's been going on for 40 years, this series. And what it shows is that when a standard question asked every year is, do you think overall taxes and public services, we should put taxes up and spend more on public services, cut taxes, cut public services, or keep both overall about the same? And until the last 4 or 5 years, very, very few people said cut taxes and public services. And since since COVID and the last 3 or 4 years, these figures are up from about 3, 4, 5% to getting on for 20%. It's still a minority, quite a small minority, but it is significantly higher. And I think what's happening is that a combination of inflation and stalled living standards, people are increasingly nervous about how they will get to the end of the week or the end of the month. And therefore the thought of lower taxes, even if it means cutting public services, becomes more attractive to those people.
I wonder also whether we talk about this a lot, sort of loss of faith in the system, that people maybe don't even mind paying a lot of taxes if they feel the money's being spent well. And then what we've seen over the last 5-10 years, arguably, is just a failure to deliver on big infrastructure, a failure to show improvement in things like the NHS, despite hoiking all sorts of money at it. I wonder if that's a factor in this.
That's certainly a factor, that people think the government wastes money and therefore they don't get, if they pay higher taxes, they don't get back in better services, health, education, crime or whatever. But this isn't new. I remember in the height of New Labour, when they were putting lots of money into the National Health Service, when I was at YouGov, we had two things. Firstly, that people had noticed that healthcare had improved, that waiting lists had gone down. But secondly, who do they credit? They credit their local hospital, the local doctors, the local nurses. They didn't credit the government nearly as much.
So let's talk about the government now, because he's weathered a bit of a storm, Keir Starmer, but the effect of that seems to be that the power in the party has become even more strongly to the left. So you've got characters like Miliband and Rayner and Burnham and Powell and people like that being quite vocal yesterday. Ed Miliband saying Starmer exists to battle the class divide. Is that a priority for voters? Do voters want to see a left-wing Prime Minister battling the class divide?
I think what voters want to see is efficient government, going back to what we were discussing just a moment ago, taxes well spent, public services well delivered. Now, as to left-wing, there's a difference here between what a party, let us call it the Labour Party, does and says in opposition and what it does in government. In opposition, all it can do is say things. And therefore, if in saying things, it gets the label left-wing, then voters on the whole don't like that. In government, you have an advantage. You not only say things, you do things. So if Keir Starmer or successor or whatever were to introduce more, quote, left-wing policies in the next 6 months or so, the judgments will not be what voters say at that moment. This is left-wing, I don't like it. The judgment will be, will those measures work? And when the New Labour came in, they did a pretty good job in both escaping the label left-wing, but then actually doing quite a lot of left-wing things. For example, putting up national insurance to pay for more healthcare. For example, tax credits, Sure Start, a minimum wage. There were lots of things which were pretty radical and did cut child poverty, but because they were seen to work, and because you had a leadership that was not banging on about being left-wing, the public liked it.
So banging on about being left-wing, which is of course what many people in the Parliamentary Labour Party like to do, might not be the most sensible thing electorally. I think it's a really interesting point. Starmer personally, he's survived this week, it seems, but the latest poll from YouGov found that just 40% of those who voted for Labour in the last election think he should stay as Prime Minister. Does the pollings, from what we can see, suggest that he still is personally in a great deal of drama?
Keir Starmer's personal ratings are dreadful. They've been getting worse. They're now at around their worst level, depending on which pollster you look at. But they are awful compared with either him a year ago or other prime ministers for the last 50 or 60 years. Look, I think the fundamentals haven't changed. We had this dramatic day on Monday when it started off with people thinking he'd be out by the end of the day, and by the end of the day after he'd spoken to MPs saying, wow, he's wonderful, he's pulled it round. I don't think either of those views were right. The fundamentals are bad for him. Let me put it like this, Stig. Think of his premiership like an aircraft wing with metal fatigue, right? Yeah. Now, if an aircraft wing has got metal fatigue, unless you fix it, at some point it's going to drop off. The plane is going to crash, but you don't know exactly when. And so I think there's still metal fatigue in Keir Starmer's premiership. Do you remember when Boris Johnson fell, it was basically over Partygate and lying. But the metal fatigue moment was a man called Chris Pincher, who nobody knew before. Most people have now forgotten, but he was a sex pest in the government whip's office. And that expose, Boris Johnson was out in 48 hours. Chris Pincher was the metal fatigue moment for Boris Johnson. Will there be a metal fatigue moment for Keir Starmer? I don't know if there is, and if there is, I don't know when or what it'll be.
Well, before you go, what about the Gorton by-election, 2 weeks' time? There's an argument that if Labour win it, and you can tell us how likely that is, this is the opposite of a metal. That might help fix the metal fatigue, but if they lose it, that could be a moment.
If Labour win it, I think that'll be big for Keir Starmer. It certainly buys him quite a lot more time. I'm not sure it settles it definitively. I think the point about by-elections like that is the Reform are clearly out in front. They will probably get, I would guess, 35, 38% of votes, something like that. The question is, will the other 60, 65%, will they combine sufficiently behind one candidate to overtake Reform, or will that 60, 65% be split all over the place? Labour, Green, Lib Dem, Conservative, whatever. And so it's a question of whether the anti-reform vote can line up sufficiently to defeat Reform. But Keir Starmer will be watching that with anxiety, I'm fairly sure.
Yeah, and there's some briefing that Labour are getting a bit more confident they could win it. So we'll have to see. It's going to be a very exciting Thursday into Friday morning, isn't it? Peter, good to speak to you.